And so I was reading a blog post on your website, and you were talking about the pros and cons of
Hmm.
outsourcing software development. Can
Yeah.
you share, like real life examples where you may have outsourced something and the positives and negatives of that? Like, what was your
Yeah.
experience like doing that?
Yeah. So in all of my different stops, right? So even at Blavity, there are times when we outsource. Sometimes when we bring things in house. In my other companies and ventures, that same decision making criteria applies, right? And so generally, my rule of thumb is that early on, it's better to outsource it because you don't know if it's going to work. Outsourcing is more, it's a larger initial upfront investment, but you don't carry the cost over time, right? And so for something that potentially may not work or may not be monetizable, outsourcing it allows you to have a very narrow scope. It allows you to get more bang for your buck, right? You're typically not having to think about who do I need to hire, how many people I need to hire, what are those skill sets, which takes a lot of time. You can work with somebody that has all that, and you can just sort of say, "This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying to build," and go for it, right? And so that's generally my advice there. Now there are some risks, and I can think, I've had good experiences outsourcing with some firms, even offshore, right? I think 10 years ago it used to be that people were very wary of outsourcing to offshore development firms. If there are no regulatory issues, no sort of like data security compliance issues, then that's a viable path. It's very, very cost effective. I've had good experiences onshore and offshore, some bad experiences. And what I will say, in those bad experiences, what you typically get is you sort of get bad actors from adversarial countries, right? Like, so countries who are interested in stealing intellectual property from U.S. entities. You get either people who are from those countries who are posing to be U.S. citizens or being citizens of another country, and that really they're in it to, one, either steal IP, or two, create backdoors in what you're doing. And early on at Blavity, this was several years ago. I would say like in 2018, we had this random thing where we were being hacked and our sites were always going down by from Russian bots, right? Like we were always going down, and Morgan was like, "Yo, what's going on? Why are we always going down?" And I would actually look in and see that we are being actively hacked from Russia, right? And a lot of this was because early on, when you are trying to get the market quickly, you're trying to build things quickly, and you are outsourcing. Sometimes, if you are, just going for the cheapest vendor, you may actually be getting some bad actors who are playing a long game. They're trying to put some back doors in what you're building. You're trying to infiltrate or exfiltrate some IP. So that's something to be careful of.
So when you think about outsourcing in those earliest days, and you might even be trying to raise funds also. So does outsourced technical talent impact fundraising?
Yeah, so it does, right? And typically, and this is interesting. What I talk about in my book, which the startup paradox, the fourth elements that I talk about, right? Which is team, product, customers, and then funding. When investors are evaluating a startup, they're really looking at those three other things, right? And really, honestly, all four, right? They're looking to see, have you raised money before, right? Because investors kind of have this herd mentality. If you've raised or you got money from this other person before, and they make it like if Warren Buffett is investing in something, then I'm
Everybody's
gonna
in.
invest in it too. Everybody's in it, right? Or so, but if you're a startup and you haven't raised money before, then they're looking to say like, okay, what about your team? Do you have customer traction? Do you have a good product, right? And so, yes, you're right to note that in those early days, if your team is mostly made up of offshore outsourced talent, that can be a risk, especially as it relates to intellectual property. The investors are going to want to know, like, hey, have you made sure that the work that these people are doing, you own it, that they don't own it. But really, the story has to be, how are you leveraging your limited resources to, if you don't have a strong team, how are you somehow building a great product, right? Or how are you somehow getting great customer traction? A more attractive option that I will say that has really emerged, and I talk a bit about it in the book, Hacking the Startup Paradox, and it's something that I do and have done, is this notion of like a fractional CTO. And so this is really for, if you're a founder where you've got a limited budget, you've got some money to spend, but you can't afford to hire a full team. You have not found that technical co-founder, but you don't know how to find an outsourced development team. What you could do is work with somebody who is a fractional CTO, like somebody in my position who has built companies before, who has done it, where their incentive is like, they're not going to charge you what they would normally charge somebody to do this, right? Because you can't afford that. Really what they're trying to do is say, how can I partner with you in some capacity and be a part of your team and share in the upside, but lend my expertise, my time, my credibility to help you build and to help you assemble a strong team. What I've seen recently is that investors, in the absence of having a core team yourself, when you do have this sort of fractional expertise, that's a good substitute, right? Like think of some of the greatest founders that you can think of who have built strong businesses. If an investor is like, oh, you got so and so spending 20 hours a month with you, helping you build or helping to do this, and they've scaled up and they've built companies, then cool, like they're willing to roll with that, and that's a viable model.
And so let's take that one step further, because if I am not a not a technical founder, I'm outsourcing technical talent, and then I'm also raising money. The fundamental thought there is that I could potentially get funded with an idea because I can't implement the thing. And so let's take that conversation. Like, are people still being funded with just ideas?
Not Black people, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it's tough. Jeez. I mean, if you're a Black person, if you're a woman, if you're a Black woman, each of those, it just makes it harder, right? And
not technical, all those things.
And not oh my gosh, you're right. So if you're not technical and you are you are not a white man with a network. I used to work at a company where the founder, and it was part of his story, I got funded based on an idea. And to me, that was ridiculous. I mean, in the line of work that we do, we cover it on Afrotech all the time. TechCrunch covers it. There are so many founders and companies where you look and they've raised millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then their product never takes off. They never make any money. I mean, I can think about all these AI companies, that have built like the AI pen or the little orange looking rabbit thing, like all these companies that raise a lot of money and they have not proven that they deserve it. And you get, so many entrepreneurs who are non-technical, but they have good ideas, but they can't build it because they're Black and because they are Black or they are a woman or a Black woman, they don't get those resources. And so really what it comes down to, and this idea of the startup paradox, which, I talked about as I was mentoring people, and then I wrote this book about it, is that if you are a non-technical founder, or even if you are a technical founder and you don't have the luck or the luxury to just be implicitly believed as credible like white men often have, then building a startup is going to be almost impossible unless you get creative and figure out how to hack one of these resources, right? If you've just got an idea, you either got to turn that idea into a product, or you got to get some customers who believe in that idea and are like, okay, I'll pay you to build that for
pre-order,
me. Because investors aren't going to be the ones to do it, right? So I wouldn't bank on getting funded for an idea, right? You got to somehow either figure out how to get that product built using some of the things I talk about in the book, using automation, using AI, using different tools as a non-technical founder that allow you to build a product, or you've got to try to build a team when you don't have funding. Again, using some of the ways that I talk about in the book, bartering your skills, hiring interns, or finding co-founders, or working with fractional service providers, or you got to try to get some customers, right? Get those pre-orders that you just mentioned, or be an entrepreneur in residence, or get somebody who is going to pay you as a consultant to add value, but you build the product at the same time. So those are the tactics you really got to think about.
How much does how something works matter anymore? You talked about IP a little bit ago. In these days, I can take your idea and just do it a different way. So how much does IP matter anymore, or is it the traction that matters more?
Yeah, so I'm going to say traction from an investor standpoint. Traction is what matters. I mean, we look at businesses all the time, and I think most of us can probably relate to this. Apple is a good example of a company from just what do their products do? Like the iPhone, everybody always jokes about, on an Android, they've had that since, 2012 or whatever, right? iPhone just got it. But everybody wants an iPhone, right? And so it's less of, and that's an important question, because entrepreneurs have to balance this, right? It is important that you have some defensibility to protect you against bigger companies who can just steal the idea, right? So you want to have some defensibility, some intellectual property, some ingenuity that is interesting and creative that protects it. But at the end of the day, if you focus all of your energy and attention on how can I build a wheel that is the most innovative and technologically advanced wheel ever, when people just want something that's going to transport their vehicle, make it roll continuously from one point to the other, you have to balance that. And so ultimately what you need to be thinking about is, how do I get to market and get traction? And that's where you've got to focus on workflow, and you've got to focus on experience and usability. You've got to look at, as a founder, when you are looking to build a product or enter a market, the first question you should be asking yourself is, what are the opportunities to make it easier for people to get the value that they want? And value typically is about solving a problem. And so a good example of this is with like a lot of these AI startups. There are literally 100 that start a day, and all of them are basically wrappers around ChatGPT. They're all just prompting ChatGPT and doing something. So it isn't so much about whether you got the most innovative AI solution. It's about whether you can understand, what are people trying to do? How are they trying to get from one point to the next? And what is the friction there? Where is it cumbersome? Where is it complicated? Where is it time consuming? And how can I build something, regardless of how it works, but the way users interact with it, it delights them because it's simpler, right? So that's why so many people prefer iPhones over Androids, because yes, Androids, you can do everything under the sun, but I'm not,
I don't want to do everything.
Right. If you're not a hack, or you're like, I don't know how to like root my phone and then install this firmware and do this patch update. And you don't know what that stuff means. But iPhone is like, yeah, we came out with it 10 years late. But when you do it, it's like, man, that just works.
Yeah, imagine.
That just works, and it's easy and it's delightful. So, you've got to focus on that market share, and you get that by focusing on experience of your users and your customers.
You said a couple of things that I want to come back to, and it's about like ideas and making things easier for people. It was I think it was Ev Williams, one of the co-founders of Twitter, who said this, and it kind of changed the way I thought about a lot of things, because when you're working on a startup, you hear often, I'm sure you hear often, of people who have ideas and they want to change what people do. Instead of doing what they're doing, they want to make them do something else. And Evan was talking about how that's probably not the best idea, because you want to make it easier to do what they already want to do, instead of trying to get them to change behavior. Can you talk about that from your perspective?
I love that you brought that up, because people who believe what Evan is refuting, they'll always point to I think it was Henry Ford and Steve Jobs kind of would also mention this, which is the idea that if I asked people what they want, they would have said they wanted a faster horse, right?
Yeah.
And so they look at that and say, like, you can't ask people what they want. You just gotta be so far in the future that you built that. And really, I think if people actually sit and look at it, when this idea of like when you ask people what they want, what you really have to focus on is not what product you want, because yes, people are only constrained by what they know, but you have to focus on what problems are you trying to solve. And the problem that whether it's a horse or a vehicle, like a gasoline powered vehicle or a self-driving vehicle, ultimately the problem that solves is I need to get from one point to another, and the distances are long, right? I need to get from one place to the other. That's the problem, right? And so if you focus on, if you actually look at it from that standpoint of like the core problem that people are trying to solve, what are those things? And then your opportunity to innovate is is helping them do those things better, right? Whether it's a horse or a car or a self-driving vehicle, it's just the delivery mechanism for the solution, right? But you have to not focus on delivery mechanisms. You have to focus on the actual problem and figure out where's the space for innovation. And that's where your ideas land. And so what I always encourage founders to do when they come to me and they have an idea, and I would say most 9 out of 10 founders, when I talk to them, their idea doesn't make any sense because it's a problem that only they have. And I always sit back and I say, well, what problem are you solving? Because everybody comes and they pitch a product. They don't pitch a solution. They say, I'm going to build this thing and they tell you about all the features and everything that's going to do. And I always challenge them to step back and say, okay, well, what problem are you solving? Like, what solution is this?
That's good.
And then once they get there, it's like, okay, well, who has this problem? And then the last question you got to ask is like, okay, is this a problem they're willing to pay to solve? Because I got a lot of problems that I'm not going to pay any money to solve. Mm-hmm. I got a lot of annoyances in my life. I got a lot of things that are like, oh, if somebody fixes, that would be cool, but I'm not paying for it.
Yeah.
Right? So to be an entrepreneur that's successful, right, you want to make sure that you have an idea that is touching on a problem that a lot of people have and a lot of people are going to pay to solve. Those are the ideas that make it.
And pay at enough of a rate to make it make sense.
Exactly.
Doing it.
They're going to pay more than it costs you to deliver the solution. Exactly.
Absolutely. If you could distill your entrepreneurial journey into a tweet, give me that tweet.
Woo. Man, I would say this, that my journey as an entrepreneur, this is going to be not entirely accurate, but it's about 70% there. One, there's this Kanye West line. Kanye West, not Ye or Yeezy. This is old school Kanye right here.
Pink polo right here.
It's a lyric. Do the rap and a track, triple double, no assists. And that line just always sticks out to me. One, now obviously as the co-founder of Blavity, I got a great team. One, we've got a tremendous leader in Morgan, who is just a workforce, who is a visionary, who none of this happens without her. So if anybody is triple double no assists, is Morgan. But I relate so much to that line, not to imply that I've never had help or that I do this all on my own, but we as founders, and what I think Morgan had to learn, what I had to learn, what Aaron had to learn, is there's no cavalry coming, right? We're not going to get the $100 million just for an idea. That all we have is us and our community. And so when you think about the story of Blavity and our journey as entrepreneurs, you think about my individual journey as an entrepreneur, which yes, includes Blavity, but also includes Cinchapi. It also includes, other things outside of Blavity that I've built and I've done. I've had to be in a space where I had to learn not only, yes, I have a technical background so I could build product, but I had to learn how to build businesses. I had to learn how to build financial models. I had to learn how to do sales. I had to learn how to do marketing. Morgan had to learn how to build product and be a product manager. Nobody taught us these things. We didn't go to college and learn these things. Yeah. We had to come out and we had to not only rap, we had to make beats, we had to mix, we had to go market, we had to go on tour, we had to do all of that. And so that's what my entrepreneurial journey has been about. It's been about that hustle, and it's been about not waiting on somebody to come and support you, but figuring out how to do it and doing it on your own.
How involved should a technical co-founder be when they're brought in after the idea is already thought up? Like, are they, I need you to come in and sit in front of the keyboard, or are they involved, or should they be involved in, the idea flourishing even further, potentially?
Yeah, so I think that the best technology is built when the people building the technology understand the business case for it. Because often when technologists are building in a vacuum, at the end of the day, building technology is both is an art and a science. And what technologists and engineers are motivated by is a challenge. And the most immediate challenge is, can I build the most impressive thing technically? And so if you're in a vacuum as a technologist, that's what you're going to do. But as we just talked about, it isn't necessarily, do you have the best advanced back end thing? It's about, can you build a business with traction? And so the more you can get the people building the technology closer to the business and at the very least understanding what the challenge is there so that they can get motivated by that. But even beyond that, contributing their ideas and saying like, okay, cool, I understand this is what we're trying to do from a business standpoint. This is the problem we're trying to solve. This is what users are saying. They can then contribute ideas about how to use technology to do that more quickly, more efficiently, and at a greater scale. So I definitely think that if you're somebody that you're like, look, I got an idea, I've been building this, and I just need somebody to come in and do it, the more you can actually involve them in saying like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Are we off base? Should we be thinking about this differently? The better ultimately the product is going to be.
So then what makes somebody consider elevating that person to co-founder level? Because you don't have to be there on day one to be co-founder, but there's got to be some decision-making calculus that says, you know what, I actually want you on the cap table.
Yeah.
Deeply on the cap table.
Yeah, it's like that decision when, you decide to give somebody a ring or accept somebody's ring, right? It's similar to that. And I do talk about this in my book. Taking on a co-founder, that is a relationship that is significant. And so because you are now yes, there's hierarchy, right? There's CEO and even with co-founders, right? Somebody's got to be the leader.
Yeah.
But you are now moving from a place where you are not just giving direction and holding people accountable to execute. You're now entering a partnership where you are collaborating on vision. I mean, it's sort of like if you're married or you have a life partner, you have kids with someone, you're collaborating and you're sitting and talking together and saying, well, where are we going to live, or how are we going to raise the kids, or are we going to let them eat these foods? Are we going to make them do this thing, or this happened? How are we going to discipline them? You're having those questions where it can't just be your way and it can't just be their way. And sometimes what you want is not going to happen. Sometimes what they want is not going to happen. You have to come and compromise or come and figure out like, okay, on this thing, you feel more strongly, so I'm gonna let you have it. Or on this thing, we're gonna figure out a way where we come to some consensus and compromise. And so the point at which you decide to elevate someone to that, I think, is when you realize that one thing, practically speaking, is that you want them, you don't want to lose them. Because when you have somebody who is just either helping you on a fractional basis, or they're just an employee, or they're a contractor, it's purely transactional, right? And if they get somebody better, if something better comes along, I mean, it really is like dating. If somebody else comes along that's better, or that is making me feel more motivated, or more challenged, or pay is better, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be, then they're probably going to go there. So one is like, I can't lose this person. They're too valuable to what we're doing, that they need to feel, and I need to recognize them more as part of the team. And then two is when you really, when you are able to work with that person and you really feel as though they make your life easier, right? Like it's sort of like when you manage people, we've all managed people where like managing them is a job in and of itself. Like your job is just to manage. When you get people who are like, hey, I'm no longer at a point where I'm managing you, but it's like you are adding so much value that, yeah, I may be checking in on you and I may be, holding you accountable to things, but you're coming up with ideas and you're driving things forward and you're doing this without me having to tell you. You're making my life easier. You're giving me time back. You're doing those things. So when you get to that point, that's when you consider it. And I would say only after you've had conflict with that person.
Yeah.
Like in any relationship, you don't want to marry somebody you've never had a fight with.
There you go.
Because you want to make sure that y'all can disagree and still work together and still be productive. So that's how I would think about it.
The book is Hacking the Startup Paradox, which effectively just says a lot of things don't make sense in startups. Here's how you navigate. Here's how you navigate it.
Yeah, exactly.
And some things may be intuitive, some things may be backwards just because of the way it works. You're trying to build something out of nothing, and in that regard, what are common mistakes you see technical co-founders make?
The common mistake that I see technical co-founders make is trying to build the most complicated, complex, technically impressive product before it has any market validation. And by market validation, I don't even necessarily mean traction, though it's good if people are paying for it and using it. But people, they don't do customer discovery, which is the process of going out and talking to people and saying like, hey, is this a problem? Do you, how do you try to solve it today? What are the opportunities to do that better? And is it a problem you're willing to pay to have solved? Like I often try not to pick on product. I often try not to pick on actual companies. So forgive me if I'm out of line here, but just contemporarily there is all these AI products, and some of which I bought off the hype, but there's one now I think called Friend, right? There's a story about
I've heard about
the person paid a whole bunch of money for Friend.com, and basically it's an imaginary friend that is AI powered. It's always watching, and it's always and you can just sort of talk to it, and it'll use AI as a wraparound AI that's gonna talk back to you. And look, I don't know if that product's gonna work or not. I'm not the target user. Maybe they did some customer discovery, but for stuff like that, I'm just like, you paid a lot of money for a domain. You paid a lot of money to sort of market this thing.
Yeah.
What problem are you solving? And is it a problem that people are willing to pay to solve? Right? And the answer may be yes. I don't know their data. I don't know what they've done. And maybe they've done some research, and, there is an epidemic of loneliness, especially I think coming out of the lockdowns that we had, and people were yearning for connection, and whether that connection is artificial or not, hey, I don't know, but I think that's a good case study in making sure that whether for technical founders, even non-technical founders, make sure that you are talking to real users and not just saying like, hey, I'm building this product, will you buy it? Don't pitch your product. Go and say like, look, what are the things that you wake up frustrated by? Like what when you wake up in the morning and you think about your day, what are you dreading? Cool, let's dive into that. Okay, why do you dread that? What is it? Is it in the book I talk about this, problems or when people buy things, the reason that they buy it is either because it's cheaper than what they're doing now, it's faster than what they do now, or it's better, it delivers better quality, right? So when people are frustrated by something, it's either because this thing that I have to do or that I want to do is too expensive, or it takes too long, or, I got to do this thing, but I'm not really getting the results back that I want from it. And so you really got to kind of hone in and figure out, like, what's my lane of opportunity, right? What is the thing that frustrates you? Why does it frustrate you? And what do you do now? And what are the opportunities to improve what you're doing now and build a product that does that? Not enough founders do that. They just go and say, I've got this idea, and they build it, and they waste a lot of money on it. They spend a lot of money, they spend a lot of time, and it's a waste.
Yeah, there's you got me thinking about like MVPs, and his name escapes me now, but Reid Hoffman, and he has said, the famous line, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late.
True.
And when he said that, it was 10 years ago, maybe, when he said that. And I think about it this way is, as you know, technology has gotten so much cheaper. It's a lot easier to get things done than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And the bar has been raised on what is minimally viable. And I wonder, my question to you is the ugly site, the ugly app, acceptable anymore? Is that minimally viable anymore?
Yeah. So I think there's a literal way to look at ugly, and there's kind of a figurative way. So the literal way, which is like something that's not attractive, I do think that users associate, now you're exactly right. In 2024, the way things look, it implies a level of sophistication. And so can you just launch with a, website with a white background and a text box, and people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this.
Craigslist. Could you launch Craigslist today?
Yeah. Could you launch Craigslist today? Right. That's a good question. 9 times out of 10, no. And the good news is that building sites, building apps, building AI tools is easier than ever. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, building a Craigslist, even though it looks like, it looks like somebody just threw it together overnight, it involved a lot of work. And not only did it involve a lot of work, but it involved a lot of expertise. It's very cumbersome. Now, you can build that literally in an hour or two, right? And so, yes, the bar for what is minimally viable, as you said, has been raised just because it is so much easier to build things, right? So in the literal sense, I think, can you launch with something that's ugly? Probably not. But ugly in the figurative sense of when you have a grand vision, and this is where founders struggle, is like they have a grand vision of all the things that they want to do, all the things that their product is going to do. And it's very hard for them to launch with something that only does one thing. It's ugly in the sense that it's basic. It can look pretty, but it's so basic. And that, I think, is still true. I think that you have to, when we look at the tools we use now, there are so many examples, whether it's Netflix, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Uber, whatever we use now, not looking at the interface being ugly, but if you look at when they launched, they all really only did one thing well. Like Uber, interface aside, Uber just made it easier for you to get a taxi.
Yeah.
You imagine the stories of being in New York, especially if you're black, and I used to live in New York a little bit, where you go to Fifth Ave and you're trying to hail down a taxi. You don't know if the taxi's for hire. It drives past. You don't know if they're being racist or not. Uber just made it. Uber did one thing. It did one thing. It made it easier for you to get a taxi. Regardless of how it looked, that's the one thing it did. And now we look back and we're like, oh, like you could build an app around that. That's kind of simple, right? Like all the things that Uber does, like that is such a minimal and small use case. But that's what they launched with, and it solved a real problem that people weren't willing to pay for, right? If you could tell me that I don't have to waste, I don't have to waste 10 minutes trying to hail down a taxi, but I could do it from my apartment, from my brownstone, and order it and know as soon as I walk out, it'll be there waiting for me. Yeah, I'll pay a couple extra bucks for that. And so in the figurative sense, I do think that, yes, you have to launch for something that's ugly in the sense that it's basic, stripped down, it does one thing well, and then you got to incrementally build that up over time.
I want to end this talking about the book you just released just a little bit ago. I don't want to date the podcast, but you just a little recently you've released this.
Recently,
What made you say, you know what, I'm going to document this stuff and put it in a binder and put it on the shelves? What makes you do that versus, you know, just continuing to speak like you speak and all these things?
So as often is the case in my life, I'm somebody that thinks of, you know, will have random thoughts that I just kind of leave on the shelf, so to speak, and then I'll randomly get these ideas seemingly out of nowhere. When I decided to become a full-time entrepreneur, I remember I was sitting at my job at the time, and it just hit me. Like, I wasn't disgruntled, I wasn't upset, I wasn't, you know, I wasn't, there was no trigger in the moment, but it just hit me. And so with this book, it was a similar thing. I remember exactly where I was. I was at the airport, as is often the case since I'm always on the road. I was at the airport. I was at DCA, Reagan Airport, boarding a flight back to Atlanta. And as I was boarding the flight, something just hit me. It was like, startup paradox. I should write a book about that, because in my mind it was the framework itself. This idea of you've got, you know, a team that helps you build a product that helps you get customers that help you get funding which helps you assemble a team. It was so crystal clear in my mind, and I was like, you know, like, I really need to write this down. I talk about it, and I've never written it down before. I just know it. I've memorized it. I've talked to people about it, but it was so clear. The language was clear. The consistency of how I thought about it, how I described it, how I talked about it. I was like, you know, I need to write this down. And if I'm going to write it down, then I might as well like do something with it. And my initial idea was like, yeah, I'll just like put together a little PDF, get somebody to design it and make it pretty, put it as a downloadable on my website. But then as I got into it and I actually started doing it, it shifted from just like, let me write down this idea and like kind of make some collateral, like an asset for it that I can give people, to like writing a book. And that's ironic because, you know, as I talk about in the book, I don't read books. And I always get a lot of flack for this. Like you know, people are always so shocked. They're like, what, you don't read? And I remember growing up, my dad would always give me books, and I had to break his heart when I was like, you know, I don't read those books you give me. He's like, what? You know, everybody assumes that if you're any kind of intellectual, you're a well-read person. And always what I mean by I don't read is like, that's just not how I get information. The way that I get information is I'm a doer. Right. So like I'll deep dive on something, and I'll do research. Like, I obviously will read things, but I don't read books. I'm much more like this is what I want to know, and I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and find it out. And so for me to decide to write a book was interesting, because I had to sit back and think, well, like, why don't I read books? I had to sort of do what I advise founders to do, is like, well, what's my problem with books? Yeah. And my problem with books was that books, you know, one, don't just get to the point. They don't just say, here's the problem, here's the solution.
And it wouldn't be a book.
It
wouldn't be a book.
Right. It wouldn't be a book, right? It's just too, you know, authors have this idea of like, it's just too much. It's like, I want to open it and I want to be like, this is what I'm trying to do. It's on this page. I want it to truly be like a reference book. Yeah. And so it was really a challenge for myself to be like, look, can I communicate this idea in a manner that I would even read it? Like, I would even read this book. And for me, what that had to be is that it had to be, one, it had to answer a specific question, which was, as a founder without resources that is struggling to get over the hump, one, why am I struggling? And then two, how do I stop struggling? And then it had to give you specific things to do. And so that's why the book is, the reason this book is 100 pages, because the startup paradox is, I tell you what that is in 2 pages, right? But the reason this book is 100 pages is because I'm giving you 20 strategies to do it. And when I'm giving you those 20 strategies, I'm not only saying this is, you know, what to do, I'm telling you how to do it. And I'm telling you what website to go to, what things to download, you know, how to think about it. And so it was really important for me to write something that I would read. And when I knew I was ready to read the book, I took when I knew that I was ready to release the book, I had been working on it, and I'd stopped for about 3 weeks. And I remember I was on a flight to Costa Rica. Shout out to Morgan and CEO Spring Break. I was going to see her retreat for CEO Spring Break, and it had been 3 weeks. And I was like, all right, I'm just gonna read the book and see what I think. And I was reading the book, and I was like, damn, I actually kind of like this. I like this. I'm really happy with it. I was like, okay, we're ready. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's put it out there. So that was the process.
I love that. I think this is my last question. I want to be respectful of your time, but this one is I believe there's something special here. And so this is a quote I love. I just looked up who wrote it or who said it. It was, the lady's name is Joan Didion, and she said, "I don't know what I think until I write it down." And I love that quote. And it got me thinking about that quote when you just said what you said. Like, I'm number one, not a reader, but then you were going through these 20 different strategies. What did you learn having sat down to write out your thoughts?
Yeah.
What became clearer to you? What ahas did you have?
So there were a couple of things. One, I just want to say that I really rock with that quote and that concept. As an engineer, I always tell people the hardest part about writing code is figuring out what to call things, right? And I actually spend a lot of time before I write any code. I think about like, okay, what am I naming this project? What am I naming this variable? I will write the documentation for it out first. And not a lot of people approach it that way, but the reason I do that is because, as you've alluded to, when you can communicate about something and you can actually write it down, it clarifies.
Yeah.
It actually clarifies what the purpose is, what the intent is, what the strategy is, and what the approach is. So before I embark on anything, I name it. I bring it to life by naming it, writing it down, writing what it is, writing what its purpose is, because that is so clarifying to me. In writing this book, there were a couple of things that were clarifying. One was my voice. And I think that's so important, because when you get to a place where you are asked to speak, you're asked to write things and submit stuff there, I'm fortunate that you have a team of people who are like, especially now with AI, they will write it for you. They're like, hey, here's your speech, or here are your remarks, here's the blog post we're going to do. And I always hated that, because I would read things and I'm just like, this is like, this does not sound like me.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of things at Blavity, but one thing that's so interesting, in me and Morgan's relationship, is that whenever Morgan is gonna publish something or write something, she always has me copy edit it. Like I've got I'm like the executive copy editor for a lot of everything, and that's because I realized, and what was clarifying for me is, like, I am so intentional with my voice and how I say things, and wanting to say things in a way that is authoritative but relatable. And what I hope people get from reading this book is that there are those books like the For Dummies series that really dumb stuff. I don't want to say it dumbs it down, but it really makes it plain.
Yeah. You mean like Code for Dummies? Yeah. You mean like, yeah.
Code for Dummies.
Yeah. Okay.
I didn't want this book to be like that, right? I wanted people to read this book and be like, yo, this dude knows some stuff. Like he's an expert. Like he knows what he's talking about. But I wanted it to be so understandable and relatable. And I think that is it's a very tough thing to balance. And writing this one clarified, yes, that's how I want people to see me. I want them to see me as somebody that knows what he's talking about, does deep research, is very, very knowledgeable. It's not surface level at all, but I understand what he means. I get what he's talking about. He makes these things that were complicated make sense because they are logical, they are relatable. I can understand how to apply it to my specific situation. And so that was very, very clarifying for me in writing this book.
And Jeff Nelson, so glad to have you on the show.
Appreciate it. It's been great. Long time coming.
Yes.
Happy to be here, and let's not make it the last time.
Oh, it won't be the last. That's for sure. My man.
For sure.